Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome. Um, I am Ben Wilder, Director of the Desert Laboratory, talking to you here from Chimamagi Hill of the Horned Lizard, on the ancestral and current lands of the Tona Atom. Gary, it is so great to be here with you tonight.
Great to be with you and all our friends.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for joining us. You know, this is the last event of the fall season for us at the Desert Lab, and it's been an and we've been very proud of the program we put forth this season. But you know, every time you have that one event that's just that extra little special that you're really looking forward to, well, that's tonight. We're really pleased to be able to have all the voices that we do to share with you tonight. We're really looking forward to this. A big thank you to the Friends of Tumamoc. Many of you who may be listening are exactly that in many ways, but including being a part of our formal Friends of Tumamoc program. So thank you. It is your support that makes events like this happen, and also allows us to be strive to be good stewards of this land. So thank you. There's also a couple other people I'd just like to acknowledge right off the bat this evening. One of them who's behind the scenes and making this all flow is Roseanne Hansen. She is the director of the Tumamoc Institute for Art, Culture, and Science. And so just give major acknowledgement and props to Roseanne. Thank you for making this all go so smoothly this up to now. And then I would also like to acknowledge and to introduce you to Ana Seiferli Valencia, who's our program and research manager of the Desert Laboratory. Ana is going to be, usually she's also behind the scenes, but Ana, you're going to be working with us this evening and assisting with some of the translation.
Thank you, Ben. Glad to be here.
Thank you. We'll talk to you in a little bit. So I would also like to start this evening, and Gary and I would like to share some words and to dedicate tonight's show to our dear friend, Richard Felger. So Richard was a giant in Sonoran Desert knowledge and ecology and botany. While he grew up in Los Angeles on the sea, he found his heart at the center of the universe in the desert, as he called it. And briefly speaking, Richard's advanced our collective knowledge and understanding of the Sonoran Desert about as far as one can in a single lifetime. And his work will stand the test of time. And he would approve of us dedicating a night such as this to him. He wouldn't approve of much in talking about him, but a night of celebration, a night of poetry, of thinking, and of honoring the site and the space where we are. So, Gary, you've known Richard longer than I have, and I actually think that you and I have maybe one of the very few people that can really say Richard was a mentor to us in our formative stages. So I would love to hear some of your thoughts.
That's right. I arrived in the Sonoran Desert in about 1974, and within 3 weeks, my current neighbor, Ron Pulliam, said, "Judging from your interests, you don't need to be talking to me. You need to be talking to Richard." And within 4 days, I went up to see him in Espero Canyon, where he had a wonderful garden of desert plants, and realized I was meeting one of the finest and most brilliant eccentrics I had ever imagined, and an eccentric in the best sense of the word. He just was thrilled by desert plants and their flowers. He could talk endlessly in the funniest stories about his encounters with a plant the first time, a photographic memory of where he first uh, met these floral associates of his. And yet his interests span way, way beyond botany in ways he integrated everything else in the world with botany rather than being such a specialist that he ignored the rest. He was a prolific poet, which most people don't know. He wrote personal memoirs and gorgeous natural history essays about the fog desert of Baja California, and really was a friend to many people that Ezekiel and Omerano, beat poets and Mexican artists and writers of all stripes. And so I cannot think of him without saying over and over to myself, he probably knew more about the desert and its plants than anyone I ever met in my lifetime, and maybe than anyone in any lifetime.
You're here. Yeah. Well, he will be with us in so many ways as we continue in our journeys as well. Gary, I want to, start this evening also kind of hearing from you about the inspiration of this book. You are such a creator of you make fire happen. You make great things happen. I think this book, The Nature of Desert Nature, is one of those. You reached out to me, and I'm so honored to be a part of it. And just from the get-go of how you described it, of just tell me what you think of and how the desert means to you from a nurturing or formative space. And anyway, I can't tell you how much I've been enjoying reading, and we'll hear from collections, contributions from Allison, Omero, and Ezekiel tonight. But share with us your inspiration for the book, and also just if for those listening, we're sharing ways that you can purchase this book throughout the evening. And Gary, your opening chapter is fantastic. So anyway, please, I'm going to give you the floor, and I just can't wait to hear you describe.
Well, first, welcome all of you to Planet Desert. That's where we live. And it's the laboratory of the future. And I belatedly realize that what we learn about the desert today, will have impact far beyond where deserts are today. And what I mean by that is that after 40 years of doing field research on desert ecology in 5 of the most arid landscapes in the world, I realized that I had accidentally become part of a growth industry. Deserts now cover at least 41% of the planet's land surface. And within 20 years, it's expected that over half of the terrain on this planet will be hot and dry to the degree that true deserts are, although we can argue about whether that expansion of aridity qualifies all those lands as true deserts. But at the same time, there's something very interesting going on. There's already 2.1 billion people who live in deserts, 1 out of every 3 of us on this earth. And yet more people, refugees, immigrants, and those who I think we're speaking to tonight, who joyously and willingly came to the desert, are all finding ourselves in some of the hottest, driest places on earth, either by choice or by accident or refuge. And on top of that, there's an 18 to 20% growth rate in immigrants to deserts that's faster than the growth rate of arrivals in any other landscape on the planet. So we have both more desert, but more people in every desert on this planet. And that's the rub. While you may have come willingly and joyously into desert living and are just delighted by hiking and camping in deserts and botanizing, how many others still carry around damaging stereotypes and negative attitudes towards deserts? Do they think of them as impoverished or unproductive or simply big empty places where creatures and cultures must struggle against one another tooth and claw for scarce resources? My question to all of our speakers tonight and to you who are listening is, how can we open them up to other possibilities so they enjoy desert living as much as the 25 contributors to this book do. And that's the good news tonight, that my dearest friends and most inspiring guides who are included in this anthology are helping all of us usher in a fresher, more imaginative, and non-dualistic way of perceiving deserts. And that lens on deserts has recently emerged both in the natural sciences and in the arts and humanities. By coincidence, I don't know, but people are converging on some new ideas about deserts. And yet, those new ideas in ways strangely echo and enhance an older way of imagining aridity and solitude and sanctity and the tranquility of deserts as positive values. And this is what we find in many contemplative traditions, Buddhist, Muslim, Eastern Orthodox, Jewish, Hebraic, and Christian traditions, that a desert was a place you came to understand your life in its most existential terms. So the essays and the street murals and the poems in this book are from artists, botanists, contemplatives, cultural historians, former border patrolmen, geographers, indigenous scientists, singer-songwriters, wanderers, even oceanographers of many different creeds, cultures, and countenances. And there's so much richness to this that after editing the book, I'm slowly reading one essay a day, just to delight in the unique perspectives of the many friends, three of whom you'll hear tonight. So let me unpack what I mean by a non-dualistic way of looking at a desert that enriches us with just three quick examples. One is what I call the essence of spinescence. The first reaction that many people have to deserts is one of horror at how many spines, thorns, razor sharp teeth, and glockets, like the little almost invisible ones that prickly pears have, are all around us. And the interesting thing about that is that the first assumption about that is that the desert was on the offense against all of us, that the desert was out to get us. And desert ecologists, like the ones who first came to Tumamoc Hill a little more than a century ago, sort of shattered that notion and said, no, they're really defending themselves. They're not out to get us. They're protecting themselves from predators and herbivores with their teeth and spines and thorns. And yet, then another wave of ecologists look more deeply at this, and you could say equally that those spines and thorns are not about defense against enemies, but are sort of a protection against solar radiation and excessive heat. That the spines form a boundary layer around cacti, for example, that cool them off 10 degrees or more relative to open exposure to the sun. And so it's not an either or situation, that spines and thorns are merely to repel predators or to protect the plants from heat and high levels of sunlight. We can say the same thing with aromatic volatile oils that give rise to phrases like the stinking hot desert or the desert smells like rain, that this is one of the most fragrant places on earth. Why is it so fragrant in a place that has so little water? Why are so many plants investing a lot of energy in very complex chemicals like the volatile oils that literally cover leaves of plants like desert oregano? Well, the answer again is complex. At first, we thought that those might be coatings that merely reduced sunburn and radiation damage and water loss just like when you put on suntan lotion. And yet, as great ecologists like Jan Linhart found out, those same chemicals work to repel slugs and larvae and goats and sheep. So it's not that the aromatic oils on desert plant leaves are one or the other. They're both. They're kinds of wonderful kinds of protection that we can enjoy thanks to the incredible chefs that have come to the desert, like a beloved father of one of our speakers tonight, that enjoy these wonderful fragrances and tastes desert herbs have. And finally, as another example, there's been this long debate about whether the desert is shaped by competition, nature, tooth and claw, competition for scarce resources like water, and whether that competition is so fierce that there's no room for competition. No room for cooperation or mutualism or facilitation or symbiosis. And what we're finding now that we concede that half of the desert has been hidden from us, the half underground, is that when we go underground in a desert, there's far more cooperation and facilitation and communication through chemical signals and mycorrhizal networks than we could have ever imagined, as much as has been found in temperate rainforests or tropical rainforests. It's right here underneath our feet whenever we walk on a desert trail. So our whole notion of deserts has been refreshed by these new points of view, and some of those converge with the artists and contemplatives and great deep thinkers about the desert from every tradition. And this book has people of a half dozen traditions, cultural and spiritual, involved in it. And I want to thank all these friends to opening us to more positive ways to look at the desert, because if this is becoming planet desert, we need all the help we can get in making people feel that they can live here comfortably and meaningfully and can have a rich life without damaging other lives here. So thank you, Ben, for that opportunity to explain the book. I'd now like to introduce someone who's been one of my heroes for over 30 years. And I have to say that I've been honored to enjoy encounters and conversations with Latin America's greatest living poet and environmental activist, Homero Arigis, and his wife, Betty Ferber, for 2 decades. Every time I come together with them, whether in Mexico or the United States, it's just an enormous delight. And to add to that richness, I've recently been writing for their daughter Chloe's Climate Rebel website that is, again, expanding the ways that the arts can be in service to the environment. Homero and his wife and translator Betty founded one of the first and greatest art environment collaboratives in the world, the Grupo de los 100, nearly 40 years ago, 37 years to be exact, that has spoken out on human rights, urban contamination, biodiversity conservation, and indigenous people's sovereignty in creative ways that have had a profound impact on millions upon millions of people. And that's on top of Homero serving twice as president, international president of PEN, the most important network of support for writers, including old and infirm writers like me on the planet, and having a prolific career as a writer of novels, poems, and essays, and as a diplomat on behalf of his home country, Mexico. There's something in his work that exudes compassion and moral conviction that extends from his poetry out to public life in a way that I don't know anyone else can garner in the way that he does. All the while, Homero is producing lovely poems, extraordinarily stunning essays, and great works of fiction that have had an indirect, if not direct, influence on the conservation of monarch butterflies, sea turtles, and deserts as a whole. His corpus of poems include dozens of enigmatic images from all of Mexico's great desert landscapes. And on his last visit to the University of Arizona, he met with border tribes to promote the idea of a solar wall as a rejection of Trump's monstrous border wall. And we hope that he'll say a few words about that adventure that he went on over 3 years ago. So welcome, Homero Arigis, to Tumamoc Hill in its virtual sense. Thank you for being with us.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Gary, because you have been an inspiration for me in order I can understand the desert, because I was grown up in the mountains, very high, like 2,400 meters, 250 meters above the sea level, very far from the sea, very far from the desert. And then for me, I began to understand the desert thanks to your books, because like the desert smells like rain is a very beautiful title, because it brings together desert and water. And also when I went to Arizona, I love again your landscape of cactus. I understand the beauty of the cactus, like green trees, and splendid the landscape of cactus and rocks and all that. And also, I went to see the telescope and to see the sun, because for me the desert is the presence of the sun everywhere. And thanks so much for inviting me to this discussion, because I love your books. It doesn't seem to be a mutuo elogio, but it's just acknowledging of the beauty of your books, because they understand the part of the landscape of the planet that is the desert. And I think if the California goes the way of the fires every year, soon will be, you can add California in the desert landscape, because if they don't stop the fires, then it will be like Arizona in a few years, California, the green California. Anyway, I am going to read a poem I wrote it, because in this kind of landscape, because it was like a surrealist image in the desert. The poem is called El cuerpo blanco al fondo del desierto, a white body out in the desert. Primero vimos un punto blanco al fondo del desierto. Sin duda era un cuerpo tendido en la distancia, un temblor caliente en las arenas, una ilusión de la mirada que imagina todo, pero duda de su propia sombra. Luego vimos que el cuerpo tenía una puerta abierta. Sin duda era un objeto caído del espacio imaginario, un pájaro metálico con las alas rotas, un tesoro inservible en el día bochornoso. Ya muy cerca descubrimos que el punto blanco al fondo del desierto era un refrigerador con la puerta abierta. Bueno, Ana is there. Thank you.
A white body out in the desert. First we saw a white spot away out in the desert. No doubt some body sprawled in the distance, a heat wave off the sands, a trick of the eye that will imagine anything but doubt its own shadow. Then we saw the body had an open door. Some object, no doubt, dropped out of imaginary space, a metal bird with broken wings, some unserviceable treasure in the sultry day. Then close up, we discovered the white spot away out in the desert was a refrigerator with an open door.
Well, quiero leerles el principio de mi novela, La zona del silencio. Okay. I have petty here. Esto primero, ¿ok? La zona del silencio es una enigmática región del norte de México, en medio del desierto chihuahuense. Se encuentra en el bolsón de Mapimí, entre los estados de Chihuahua, Coahuila y Durango. Existe la idea de que las ondas de radio no pueden ser transmitidas de manera normal en la zona del silencio. Ahí caen continuamente meteoritos y polvo cósmico. Incluso se dice que la visitan extraterrestres y que ahí ha desaparecido gente sin dejar huella. Una de esas desapariciones, la de un científico, provoca una investigación que pone en movimiento toda clase de fuerzas de este mundo y del otro. Momias, espíritus reencarnados, luchadores, narcos, extraterrestres. Esta novela narra diversos misterios, muchos de ellos sin solución. Aquí en el desierto la realidad se confunde con la ficción y la soledad lleva al delirio. El desierto es un protagonista en sí mismo, cuya flora y fauna, como la endémica tortuga del desierto, historia y tradiciones indígenas, figuran en la novela.
I would like to read the beginning of my novel, The Zone of Silence. The Zone of Silence is an enigmatic area in the Chihuahuan Desert in northern Mexico, overlapping the Bolsón de Mapimí and located in the states of Chihuahua, Coahuila, and Durango. It is thought that radio signals cannot be received in the Zone of Silence. Meteorites and cosmic dust constantly fall in the area. Extraterrestrial beings are said to appear, and people have vanished without leaving a trace. The disappearance of a scientist leads to an investigation, which sets all kinds of forces in motion from the natural world and the supernatural world, including mummies, reincarnated spirits, wrestlers, drug lords, and extraterrestrial beings. Various mysteries unfold in the novel, many without solutions. Here in the desert, reality blends with fiction, and solitude leads to delirium. The desert figures as a character in its own right. Its flora and fauna, such as the endemic desert tortoise, its history and native traditions, are all to be found in this book.
Ahora muchas gracias, Ana. Ahora les voy a leer. Los epígrafes desde el comienzo, porque muy bien. El alma, inmortal y muchas veces renaciente, Platón, Menón. Otro de Anagakok al-Awa Nut Rasmussen, Intellectual Culture of the Iglukli Esquimo. Cuando al final de la vida exhalamos nuestro último suspiro, no es el fin. Despertamos a la conciencia otra vez, volvemos a la vida otra vez, y todo esto sucede mediante el alma. Ahora de Rayenari o Don Lupe, cantos de reencarnación y olvido. Así ha sido siempre el mundo y así será. un infinito trajinar de seres visibles e invisibles que nacen y mueren, renacen y remueren delante de nosotros sin que nos demos cuenta de su tribulación. Y ahora esta página de la zona del silencio. ¿Así? Bueno. Nada nunca es monótono en el desierto. Nada nunca es como parece ser. En medio de la quietud hay un movimiento. En la vegetación apagada hay una flor roja. En las dunas inmóviles se forma un montículo instantáneo. A la hora del crepúsculo el viento avanza sin oposición ni ruido por kilómetros y kilómetros de polvo. Un rumor de agua atraviesa el lecho de los mares antiguos. En la planicie quebrada por la sequía, la yuca, el nopal rastrero y la piedra caliza parecen orejas vueltas hacia el infinito. La figura humana que atraviesa los llanos de la gobernadora es una alucinación en los ojos del reptil que la columbra desde una roca, como si al andar ella fuera atravesando un juego de párpados. En el territorio del camuflaje, criaturas anhelosas de lluvia se desplazan aquí y allá casi inadvertidamente, confundiendo al ojo. La luz es tan vibrante que forma estrías en la frente. La planta embarrada en el suelo da la impresión de no haberse movido de su lugar desde hace siglos. En el mundo de los cactos, las espinas se mueven solas. La tortuga del bolsón, esa reliquia del Pleistoceno de origen marino, sale de su madriguera con patas que un día fueron aletas. Como si no mirara, su mirada amarilla escruta los alrededores. Nadie sabe si el halcón de cara blanca que caza lagartijas y ardillas es real o imaginaria. Es un animal tutelar o un perseguidor de sombras fugaces. Aquí la realidad se mezcla con la ficción y la soledad hace delirar. En un instante el ave se pierde en el espacio como si jamás hubiese sido. Al meterse el sol, el hombre empieza a ver. Gracias.
The soul, immortal and born again many times. Plato, Meno. When at the end of life we draw our last breath, that is not the end. We awake to consciousness again. We come to life again. And all this is effected through the medium of the soul. Aua, the Engakak and Nud Rasmussen intellectual culture of the Igluklik Eskimos. Thus the world has always been, and thus will it be, an endless coming and going of visible and invisible beings who are born and die, are reborn and die again right before our eyes, without our ever noticing their tribulations. Reyanari, or Don Lupe, songs of reincarnation and forgetting. Nothing is ever monotonous in the desert. Nothing is ever what it seems to be. There's a movement amidst the stillness, a red flower in the drab vegetation, a momentary mound rises abruptly on the motionless dunes. At dusk, the wind blows soundlessly and unhampered over miles upon miles of dust. A murmur of water ripples through the bed of ancient seas. On the drought-cracked plain, yucca, creeping prickly pear, and limestone rocks look like ears cocked towards infinity. The human figure crossing the creosote bushflats is a hallucination in the eye of the reptile that spies it from a rock, as if the walking figure were part of a blinking game. In the territory of camouflage, creatures craving rain scurry hither and thither, nearly unnoticed, bewildering the eye. The light is so dazzling that it furrows the forehead, a muddied plant on the ground, seems not to have budged for centuries. In the world of cacti, spines move on their own. The Bolson tortoise, that relic of the Pleistocene, crawls out of its burrow on limbs that once were flippers. Imperceptibly, its yellow gaze surveys the surroundings. No one knows whether the prairie falcon hunting lizards and squirrels is real or imagined, a tutelary animal or a pursuer of fugitive shadows. Here, reality merges with fiction, and solitude brings on delirium. In a flash, the bird is lost into space, as though it had never existed. When the sun sets, man begins to see.
Thank you, Anna.
Gracias, Homero. Gracias, Ana. All right, it's now my pleasure to introduce Ezequiel Escura. Ezequiel is one of the most respected voices in Latin America for the conservation of nature. Accordingly, he was awarded the 2020 American Association for the Advancement of Science Award for Scientific Diplomacy. While other conservation leaders focus in tropical rainforests, Ezequiel is the stalwart for the desert. His vision embraces the arid lands and their seas, such as the Gulf of California, as vibrant places imbued with a rich biocultural diversity on par with the other regions of mega-diverse Mexico. As Mexico's equivalent of the US Secretary of the Interior, he was instrumental in the establishment of Mexico's first biosphere reserve in the desert borderlands, the Sierra del Penacate y el Gran Desierto de Altar. He maintains an active lab as a professor at the University of California, Riverside, of which I'm a proud alum, and recently finished a 10-year period as director of UC Mexis, empowering dozens and dozens and dozens of students. Ezequiel is also a master science writer and naturalist, including his environmental history of Mexico City, the Basin of Mexico, which has gone through multiple editions and remains a bestseller. Ezequiel, it's an honor and privilege to have you join us this evening.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much for this invitation. I don't know where to start. First of all, let me tell you what an honor it is to have been invited by Tumamoc Hill and the people at Tumamoc Hill. Thank you, Ana Seyfro Valencia, Roseanne Hanson, and Ben. You make a wonderful team and you're doing great things in Tumamoc Hill. For me, since I started reading many, many decades ago, all the big explorers, the great explorers that came from Arizona into Mexico, Tumamoc Hill has been really, really important for me. Now let me move to the book. Around a year ago, I got an invitation from Gary Nabhan that basically said that he was exploring this wonderful essay, by the way, that makes the central part of the book, the beginning chapter of the book, The Nature of Desert Nature. And he was wondering, one of the questions that Gary was pursuing at that time is where the desert came from. What is the biogeographical origin of the desert, which is a question that has a dimension in deep time, in millions of years. But he was also, in parallel, thinking about where do desert scientists come from? What is their origin? How did they come to start working in and studying and doing research in the deserts of North America? So he asked me to write an essay about that and contributed to the book. We had mutually an agreement of 500 words. So I started furiously writing about where do I come from in terms of desert ecology. And very rapidly I realized that I hadn't even finished my writing about my childhood and had already finished the 500 words. So I ended the essay rather abruptly. And first I read it, I said, I don't like it. It ends too abruptly. But then I thought, no, it's the way it should be. It's a little essay about the geography of childhood, the importance that being in contact with nature has on human beings, and what followed after. And if you allow me, I will read. The title of the essay is Longing for El Monte. I was born in northern San Luis in Argentina. That's where the Spanish Chaco drylands end, and just some 100 kilometers south, the great Patagonian dry pampas begin, with the tussocky crowns of myriad grasses waving and whispering into the wind. But where I grew up, you were surrounded by mesquites and creosote bushes and cacti and carandai palms so fierce that if you got stung by the tip of their leaves, it would swell your joints and hurt for weeks. The spiny scrub was known by the locals as El Monte, the brush, and biogeographers took that name to designate this desert as El Desierto del Monte, with capital letters, as if the capitalized name was part of an honorary degree conferred to the thorny wilderness by the pomp of academia. But for me, El Monte was simply a beguiling arena for endless adventure and the cosmos of my own exploration of the natural world. Climate there is staggeringly seasonal. It only rains, when it does rain, in summer during 4 months, from December to March. Huge cumulus clouds start coalescing on the horizon and develop into giant mushroom-like formations of stunning colors. You see them coming from the northwest, rumbling and exploding in thunder and lightning, and suddenly the desert starts smelling like creosote bush and like mesquite leaves, with the first gust of cool wind. A few drops splatter on the parched, dusty ground, and a whiff of wet dirt saturates the air in anticipation of the coming storm. And then the entire sky seems to fall on you in a deluge so intense that it makes you wonder if it will ever end. But it stops in a few minutes, and El Monte becomes mysteriously silent, a deep, almost religious silence, only broken by the short, nostalgic, sad chirps of the tinamous. In summer, once the rains have started, El Monte bursts with fruits of all sorts. I used to go out with my childhood buddies and collect sweet mesquite pods, called there algarroba, the fleshy drupes of chañar, a green stem legume tree, the stinkingly sweet, almost fetid coquitos of the palms, and piquillin. Ah, piquillin, it was the joy of my childhood. In the Blackthorn family, it produces dense clusters of sugary fruits like miniature plums that we used to harvest by placing a canvas under the canopy and beating the shrub with sticks and planks. Then we would gorge on the juicy fruits like they were the last food on earth, and happily spend the whole summer in a deliciously oblivious state of osmotic diarrhea. But no childhood lasts forever, and terrible things, sadly, do happen. A military dictatorship forced me to leave my native Argentina, lest I join the tragic ranks of so many other desaparecidos. Mexico, a generous country with extraordinarily creative and big-hearted people, opened its doors to me. And so I became Mexican. But the nostalgia for the desert haunted me in the chaos of Mexico City until I visited the Sonoran Desert and saw, with tears in my eyes, similar mesquites, the same creosote bushes, and the same smell of wet dirt when summer thunderstorms arrive. So I decided that I would be a desert ecologist and study the drylands of Mexico. The rest is simply a resume. Paul Dayton would call it propaganda, the listings of an academic career. But the true force behind my work was really nostalgia for the desert, for the shade of the mesquites, the juicy pulp of the cactus fruits, and the smell of the creosote bushes. Or, as the rancheros would say, lo demás es lo de menos. Thank you. Now, this is Ben. Um, how much time do I have? Do I have 5 minutes more?
Absolutely. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. I want to add my voice now, not uh, not add to the text I wrote for the book. By the way, buy the book, read that book. Gary's initial essay on the history of natural history of deserts is just amazing. It will blow your mind. But I want also to add myself to how much we have paid to a dear friend, a wonderful friend, a mentor, an intellectual leader, Richard Felger. And I was in contact with Richard until very shortly after his death. We were speaking over the phone and communicating on email. And it all happened because in February, just before the pandemic started, Richard one day called me and he said, Ezequiel, you need to read Cabeza de Vaca. I said, Richard, I read it in high school. I said, no, you need to read it seriously and look at his descriptions of the plants. And so I spent the summer, because I didn't go anywhere. We were all in the pandemic, in quarantine. I spent the summer reading a 19th century version, the nearest one I could get to the original of Cabeza de Vaca's wonderful book that has this beautiful title of Los Naufragios. And I owe that to Richard Felger. And he opened my eyes to Cabeza de Vaca. I realized that Cabeza de Vaca is like El Quijote. Everybody speaks about him, but nobody has read them seriously. And I want to start with a few bullets I got from Cabeza de Vaca and end my reflection on this book and of what Gary wanted to do with this wonderful book. And one of the things I realized is that Cabeza de Vaca was really amazed when she reached what later Father Kino called La Pimeria, northern Sonora and Arizona. And from there he went down along the coast of Sonora all the way to Culiacan in searching for the Spanish colonizers and wanting to report back about his 8 years wandering in arid America, in the drylands of North America, wanting to report back to the Viceroy. And he's amazed by what he sees. And he uses one word in Spanish that I want to read to you, one phrase. He calls the Pima people and the ones he saw after, the Seri, the Yaqui, the Yoeme, and the Mayo, the Yoreme, he calls them los hombres humanos. You might believe that that was a mistake by Cabeza de Vaca. At first, I thought it was just a pleonasm of a somewhat not very well educated Spaniard writing and using redundancy in his words. And then I realized that he meant something. Hombres and humanos in particular in Spanish, can mean human, but it can also mean humane. It talks about the human dimension of the people he saw. And then he talks in terror of what the Spaniards were doing by enslaving the indigenous people of the Sonoran Desert. Let me read, I'll read the first paragraph in Spanish and then the rest in English. Dábanos a comer frisoles y calabazas. La manera de cocerlas es tan nueva que por ser tal, yo la quise aquí poner para que se vea y se conozca cuán diversos y extraños son los ingenios e industrias de los hombres humanos. I'm translating it as they gave us to eat beans and squash. The manner of cooking them is so new that being such, I want to set it down here so that it may be seen and known how diverse and extraordinaries are the inventions and industries of these humane people. Among them, we saw that the women were more honestly treated than in any other part we had seen. They wore cotton shirts that reached down to the knees, with some short sleeves over them, and skirts of shaved deer hide that reached down to the ground. And they covered their feet with hide shoes. We advanced across much of the land and found it. He's going south now. He's going south towards the Spaniards. As we advanced across much of the land, we found it all unpopulated because inhabitants of it were fleeing into the mountains, not daring to have houses, nor to farm from fear of the Christians. It was a thing that we held in great pity to see the land very fertile and very beautiful and very full of waters and rivers, and to see those places deserted and burned, and the people so weak and sick, all fleeing and hiding away. Our guides told us that they had not found any people in front of us. They were all wandering and fleeing through the thickets, hidden and in flight, so that the Christians would not kill them or make them slaves, and that the night before they had seen the Christians while they were behind some trees, watching what they were doing, and they saw how they were leading many Indians in chains. It ends, he finally meets the Spaniards, and he tells the Indians that had protected him and accompanied him, all the tribes that had followed him, all the indigenous people, he tells them, I will talk with the viceroy and make sure that you're not treated the way you have been treated. And he leaves with the Spaniards, but he's realized that he's being tricked and that slavery will continue. The last part of his book is really sad. After we sent the Indians away in peace and thanking them for the trouble they had endured with us, the Christians sent to us with cunning deceit a man named Cerveros, an alcalde, and with him two others. These took us through the montes and uninhabited places to get us away from contact with the Indians, and so that we should not see or understand what, in fact, they were going to do. From which it shows how greatly the thoughts of men deceive. For we were going about to seek freedom for the Indians, and when we were thinking that we had it, just the contrary took place. For without us knowing, the Christians had agreed to go attack the Indians that we were sending away reassured and in peace. And just as they intended, they did. This is the end of some of the most wonderful parts of Cabeza de Vaca that Richard Felger brought my attention in. And I want to just end my intervention with some ideas of my own and something I copied from Paul Dayton's chapter in the book, very short. The heartbreaking ending, full of despair, of Cabeza de Vaca's narrative should help us reflect on our double nature as humans. Sadly, we can be, and we often are, extraordinarily cruel. But we can also be extremely compassionate and empathetic. And here's the deep core of what this book, The Nature of Desert Nature, is telling us. Nurturing a sense of wonder for the natural world lead us to recognize humanity in others, los hombres humanos. Our interaction with nature and with ourselves can make us noble, decent. Paul Dayton summarizes it in his essay on this same book with this eloquent phrase. The complex interactions between desert organisms teach us the necessity of cooperation and self-defense, of patience, self-confidence, and humility, and maybe, most of all, a sense of empathy and compassion for all the organisms in both the natural and human systems we experience. That's the end of Paul Dayton's quotation. I want to thank you, Gary, dear friend, Gary Nabhan, for putting all these ideas together in this great book. You have assembled, I believe, a true geography of hope. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Ezequiel. And I'll ask you now to stay with us. And Nomero, if you can join us again. Wonderful. And Gary, please, if you want to participate in the conversation as well, that would be wonderful. So we don't get you all together very often. So I'm going to take advantage of that and ask you some questions. I first want to have your thoughts on the following. So there's an incredibly important movement that is experiencing growth and attention now. It is changing paradigms to increase the diversity of voices in all aspects of our society, including nature writing, poetry, and science. Can you each reflect on where focus is needed to amplify these voices and the unique ways that diversity is manifested in deserts in a biocultural context? I'm happy to start with any of you. I'll put you on the spot, Ezekiel. As a student of yours, I get to do that.
I know. You shouldn't be doing that. I was a good professor for you. You shouldn't put me so much on the spot. No, well, it's funny. I'm improvising as we speak, but we very often delve so much in our defeats in environmental issues, which are many, and we all carry many scars of defeats on the environment. But it's amazing how some concepts that are now everyday concept started not too long ago. I was a student in an undergrad in the university when I started reading Ramon Margalef and some other scientists talking about diversity. And at first it came from information theory. I was reading all these mathematicians that were measuring the heterogeneity of sets, very complex and rather abstruse ideas. And I got the impression that that would be important in the future. But it's amazing how there were even papers in ecology at that time claiming that diversity was a non-concept, that we should eradicate it from ecology. It's amazing now how the concept being adopted by societies, universities, schools, communities. Everybody recognizes what is diversity. And perhaps the biggest achievement of some of these people, like Ramon Margalef, is convincing the world that diversity is a good thing. In a universe that only, in a world that only 50 years ago thought that uniformity was the mandate for dominating nature and for regulating society, we have gone a long way, and diversity is now considered a virtue. But that, of course, doesn't mean that we have solved everything. And in going to your question, Ben, and sorry if I rambled a little bit, but I think it's important. We have an obligation of bringing these ideas of diversity as a value, diversity as a virtue. What Ortega y Gasset, another big promoter of these ideas, called la otredad, the otherness, the price, the value of otherness, of being different, and of respecting differences. We need to bring it to our public discourse. And it's great, very symbolic that we are in Arizona. Well, I'm not there now, but this meeting was called by Arizona because of the importance of the border and the role that historically Arizona has played in the binational dialogue. And you know this, of course, Ben, much better than probably any of us here. But this is very, very important. We have a mandate a moral imperative to try to restore the binational dialogue and bring together a message of respect for diversity. That's why I decided to bring this concept today of los hombres humanos, the realization that all humans are humans and all humans are humane.
So true. Homero, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes. What? Matthias, give me. Well, when I was Mexico's ambassador to UNESCO, I tried to get all the ambassadors to promote environmental education at all levels. It was a pity that many people at UNESCO were not interested in this environmental education. There was a meeting in Bali with the so-called 8 countries that were not developed, but not underdeveloped, and there was strangely China, India, Brazil, Mexico, Indonesia. I mentioned India, I don't remember. Well, but there were these countries. And I said, if this amount of people, this amount of humanity, of human men can go to environmental education, we can save the planet, because there are so many billion of people in these countries that they can change the situation through education. But it was a pity that at UNESCO they were not interested in these big projects to bring people together through environmental education. They don't care. And I spent a few years there trying to give them some, bringing environmental conscience, education, but they were not sensible to this thing. But when I went here to Mexico, well, then this is one of the big questions. I guess Arizona, through people like you and Ezequiel and Ben and all, Allison and all those people who have, they are sensible, they have a conscience of the importance of the border. I find Arizona the key state to bring together the two countries, Mexico and the United States. You know where or how? Through the desert, through the culture of the desert, because you have Sonora, you have Chihuahua, you have Durango, all these states in Mexico, and you have the other side in the United States. But I guess Arizona is a key state to bring more unity, more dialogue between the two countries through the culture of the desert. It's strange, but it's like that, and it's a state very open to dialogue. And since I visit Arizona, I like it very much your state, Gary, because I think it's a beautiful state, because I love the desert, I love the cacti, I have the Rocky Mountains, everything is there. And then I guess it's possible to bring the two countries together through Arizona.
Well, we hope to be able to have you back here in person sooner than later. And it's true, the lessons that we can tell and the stories we can tell through the landscapes we're within are very strong. At any point, Gary, feel free to chime in. I'm going to move to my next question, which is that, a gaping wound has been inflicted in our desert. The border wall that now divides our nations is a new reality of and for our region and this landscape. But can you help us take a deep breath, a pause, and reflect on where we are in time and spaces for hope to where we can one day realize the great dry borders reserves that so eloquently and carefully outlined and championed by Richard Felger, Bill Broyles, and others?
Did you ask anyone in particular, Ben, or did
Not
you just
yet. I was going to see where inspiration struck first.
threw the question and threw the bomb and hid your hand. Gary, why don't you start, and I can add something of that.
Last few days, I've been
You're a little faint, Gary.
hey, let me see.
Perfect.
It's better.
Yeah, thanks.
Much better.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Just the last few days, I've been down on the border where the wall has gone up with Native American leaders from 3 different tribes. And they did a healing ceremony for the border, not so much that they can take a magic wand and wish away the wall, but it was so amazing to me of people that have seen this wound in their presence could forgive the people who are involved in that their part of healing was to get over the anger, to get over the bitterness, to share in the joy and beauty of that place, and to replenish it, to restore it, and to bring the stories back to it so that will never happen again.
Well, I want to read something about a proposal that can bring together our two countries. I wrote, strangely, writing poetry, I wrote a book called about the criminal border. It's the big problem that since the 1940s, after the Second War, the concept of the Mexican cities at the border, like Ciudad Juárez, Tijuana, etc., was to make these cities a criminal border, where many Americans coming back from the Second War that were mutilated, neurotic, drug addicts, etc., were crossing the border to find drugs, prostitution, etc. Then it was the agreement of the two countries to make the Mexican border a criminal border. And there were drug dealers in Mexico City, in popular neighborhoods like La Merced and Tepito in Mexico City. There was a very famous Mexican woman called Lola La Chata that was a drug dealer in a popular neighborhood that, according once she learned that there was you can make a lot of money, travel to the border and sell drugs to the Americans, neurotic soldiers. And then it's a very famous woman, Lola La Chata, that began to sell drugs at the border. Then, since then, has been more or less Mexican border has been a criminal border. And then the way we need or the change this conception is to change to stop this kind of mentality. But we in 3 days after the because I recall 3 days after the 2016 United States presidential elections, I published a letter to Donald Trump in the Huffington Post. I wrote that there is no aspect of Mexican life that is not going to be affected by your election. When he mentioned the wall, our former foreign minister was quick to state that a wall along the United States border is not in the picture. and that Mexico would not pay for it. I wrote that, as you know, barriers consisting of fences and walls, punctuated by many large gaps and virtual fences, already spans about 650 of the 1,989 miles of the border running between Mexico and the United States, crossing cities and deserts from the Pacific Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. Its main purpose is to stop illegal immigrants and drugs from entering the United States. However, according to the DEA, Mexican cartels move most of their drugs across the border as freight or concealed in vehicles, and it is almost impossible to carry out thorough inspections. The best wall is economic prosperity, and on both sides of the border, with no need for desperate men, women, and children to risk everything to reach the land of opportunity. The present wall also interferes with habitat connectivity and free movement of animal species, such as the Mexican gray wolf, the desert bighorn sheep, the Sonoran pronghorn antelope, the ocelot, and the American black bear, whose populations know nothing about borders, and it destroys the integrity of the Sonoran Desert, which is home to critically endangered jaguars, pumas, porcupines, badgers, bisones, prairie dogs, javelinas, jaguarundis, and foxes, and hundreds of plant species, including the saguaro cactus. This marvel of nature is one of the most important desert ecosystems in the world, but it's also a place where hundreds perish each year trying to enter your country. Ever since childhood, I have been fascinated by the sun. I have a book called Solar Poems and a novel called The Man Who Loved the Sun. The idea of a solar border came to me naturally, and I told Mr. Trump that you might begin by replacing the existing barriers between the United States and Mexico with a wall of solar panels stretching along the border to provide both nations with energy from the sun. Now, that would be a truly beautiful wall. I am not sure my country would happy to pay for half. With an old friend, James Ramey, a professor at Mexico's Metropolitan Autonomous University, decided to write an article about how and why building this would be such a splendid opportunity for solving a host of problems in a conflicted and some vacant region straddling both our countries with solar energy. This was the proposal. And we traveled to Arizona, thanks to Gary, to propose this, and they reacted very well. And people in Mexico, many people were very enthusiastic. But we have in both the American side, Trump, and we had also, well, that is, yes, Mexico current president has turned his back on this kind of energy, whether solar or wind, and instead of investing heavily in increased oil and coal production and burning of fossil fuel. Well, we have now also a very negative president that is making business. He wants to go in oil and all this. But the solution is a solar border, because that can stop the illegal migration through solar panels and be an economy in itself. We visit in Arizona the Papago, the people at the border who are citizens of both countries, and they were very enthusiastic. But we stopped there with the solar border. Probably we can write a letter, inspire or induce by you, Gary, and your people at the university to propose Biden, who is more interested in the environment, a solar border, that there could be a good economy for the people, safe energy production, and also to stop the illegal migration through these solar panels, a peaceful way to stop it. Give it.
Ezekiel, you've had much of your life thinking about borders and much of your career focused on this US-Mexico border and see it reinvent itself many times. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, we are today reading Gary's excellent analysis of the history of natural history. I'm in a historic mood now. Something I mentioned, it came to my mind, something I mentioned years ago in a meeting that Joaquin Ruiz called in Arizona of universities that work across the border. And against to what everybody expected from me to start talking about the University of California, where I work, I started talking about Tumamoc Hill. And I don't remember if you were in that meeting, Ben, but I was reminding the audience that in the late 19th century, Norwegian guy got some 15 horses in Tumamoc Hill and took off southwards and did what is considered by Mexican ethnographers and anthropologists the greatest ethnographic work ever done in Mexico. I'm referring, of course, to Carl Lumpholz and his book Unknown Mexico. That is the size of the responsibility that you and Anna and Roseanne have in your hands, Ben. Tumamoc Hill for years has been, for decades, for over a century, has been a place, and Tucson also as a city, a place from where mutual understanding and mutual exploration in the scientific sense has taken place, where people have got together to save resources, to understand nature, and to share ideas. I wanted to say this because, well, you know the rest of the story, Hornaday or Jeffrey Sykes or of course, Forrest Reeves, so many brilliant minds that existed and worked in Tucson that sort of built bridges, intellectual bridges across the border that brought people together with ideas, with science, with concepts, with higher education. And I think we need to restart that. The time is right. We lived a nightmare of phobias against other people, against other countries, especially in the United States. Sad moment, but I think the situation is changing. You can feel it in the air. People are talking differently. And we need to seriously address this. How can two countries that share such a large border can work together? And this is just starting, but I'm convinced that the University of Arizona and the people in Tucson, the people in Baja, Arizona, as Gary and Ben taught me, the people of this part of the United States that are so open and so sensitive in a good way, so compassionate towards the situation in Mexico. I think that the time is right to start thinking how to promote more things. You did it at one point, Ben, and that's still going strong and wonderful, which was the next generation of Sonoran Desert researchers, bringing people together. But we should strive and work for more opportunities like that. I think the time is ripe, and we have a mandate. As a matter of fact, a moral mandate, a moral imperative. Uh, Homero was talking about that sort of not so pretty face of current governmental plans in Mexico of relying heavily on fossil fuels. Well, we have a responsibility to bring the idea to all the countries in North America, and particularly to Mexico and the United States, that if we don't take this issue seriously, we're going to have serious, very difficult problems and serious tragedies in front of us to maintain the well-being of our population. So it's not only the border; it's a need for an international dialogue, and we need to bring that. I don't know more than that, but you know, you are also in a university. How can we make students more shared? How can we make curricula for universities more shared? How can we bring students from Mexico to the United States and way back, and the other way around, students from the US into Mexico? How can we use education, science, knowledge, and facts to create a cultural bridge between two societies that desperately need it? As a matter of fact, our future depends on it.
I mean, I have to ask this next question that follows directly on what you're talking about, building that support platform, those networks that build bridges. And I've been looking forward to this opportunity to ask this very group of people this question. You know, Homero, with your creation of the Grupo de los Cien as this cross-disciplinary body of influential voices to stand up for the inherent rights of biodiversity and culture, it's been a huge inspiration. And I'm really curious, you know, and if we could talk about this forever, but we should try to keep our remarks brief. But what are the key elements of developing and maintaining collaborative bodies or networks that represent a region, a topic, and pushing towards a movement? I'm just curious if you can, Homero, start by reflecting on what the keys to success of your efforts in that area have been, and then maybe what challenges you've had.
I begin?
Please.
Well, sometimes you see our experience with the Grupo 100 that became international is that suddenly people is very interested in the environment. Scientists, writers, painters, many people, but they are waiting for an idea, a project to bring them together. And that sometimes can be a university, that, but presenting them a project, for example, like the solar panel or the education between the two. Because I thinking in Arizona because it's very well placed. It's in the United States, but it's very close to Mexico. And we share the desert, we share culture in a way. I guess people can react, but sometimes you have to present them as a project. For example, we can, if that goes ahead, we can ask writers or painters in the United States. We know sometimes they can sign with us a letter to Biden or to any event asking him to move about a solar border or a concrete thing that we have not economic interest. I am not an engineer, I am not an economist, I'm a businessman, and I have not personal interest in making business. But I think you have to present them with a concrete project. Not only will be ideal, but they can see something possible, because we are living in a sea of problems, environmental problems. We see the Arctic, we see the fires in Brazil, in California, Australia, and many, then is sometimes very difficult for individual families or people to think, what can I do? Because they have not the possibility to change. For example, myself, I see with horror the fires in California and Australia and Brazil. But sometimes your opinion, your feelings can change these disasters or this mentality of destruction, because you can see, be also very realistic. We are now flooded in many parts of the world with national dictators. Again, I remember, like myself, when we called the dictators in America Latina gorillas and all this. When you see how peaceful are the gorillas, you say, no, please. But you see that they are coming back. We're living in a year of pandemic. But everywhere there are national dictators, starting with Mexico. I never expect to see a tropical dictator in Mexico, and we have it. And can be Evo Morales, Maduro, the Argentinian woman, or still coming from the dynasty of Fidel Castro. Now is, but you see, sometimes we can do something different, peaceful, moral. Okay,
Well, I think
Bolsonaro, Betty is remember me, Bolsonaro, destroying the Amazonia is a madness. Yes.
Well, I think your point, Homero, of giving people a place to channel their inspiration and their hopes is a critical one. Gary, did you want to just say one tweet, and then I'm unfortunately going to have to end this part of the evening.
Sure. I think an experience that Allison and I were involved in with Homero and Betty is a good example of the excitement that their charisma generated that became trinational immediately. And that was the effort to send out the first group of 100 letter about monarch butterflies. And Betty and Homero called and said, we've drafted this letter with Lincoln Brower. We think the three presidents are meeting and that we can deliver a letter asking for them to pledge to a trinational effort to really invest in monarch recovery. And Gary and Allison, can you bring in 75 to 100 writers and scientists for this? We have Margaret Atwood and other people working, David Suzuki working on this in Canada. And with a matter of 3 days, we had the letter posted on the front page of New York Times and the signatures on the website. And that letter was delivered to the diplomats meeting at a trilateral meeting. And the Mexican diplomat said, Canadians and Americans are not going home until you sign on to this. and within, we had just put a website up for Make Way for Monarchs. We had 2.5 million hits to that website within the first month of putting it up because of the excitement that Betty and Homero and their colleagues did. And so I think we need to inspire people to collaborate and make bridges that can't go away. And that's why I'm so grateful for these collaborations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I could pick your brains forever, but unfortunately we'll have to pause it there. Ezequiel, Homero, muchísimas gracias. Gary, thank you.
Thank you, Ben. It's been an honor. Thank you, Gary. And thank you all the Tumamocians. It's been a great honor.
And thank you, everybody, because awake enthusiasm about humanity and about cooperation between the countries, about the ecologies, everything.
Wonderful. All right. It is now my pleasure to hand the word over to Allison Hawthorne Deming to take us home. And this is truly last but not least. Allison, good evening. Thanks for joining us. So I'm just going to say a little bit about you, and then I'll hand you the word. Allison is a Regents Professor and former Howry Endowed Chair at the University of Arizona, where she also formerly served as Director of the Poetry Center. Winner of the Walt Whitman Award for Poetry, Allison's book of long poems reflecting on the intelligence of monarch butterflies, The Monarchs, a poem sequence, is already considered a classic in nature writing. Her anthology, co-edited with geologist Laurent Savoy, The Colors of Nature, Culture, Identity, and the Natural World, ushered in a new era of multicultural nature writing. She divides her time between Grand Manan Island and, lucky for us, Tucson. Allison, please feel free to take the time that you originally had planned. We were ambitious in this schedule. All of you, thank you for staying with us. And anyway, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me? And am I present and accounted for? Okay.
Check.
What a beautiful and rich evening thus far. I am so honored to be in the company of people that I admire so much and who have devoted their lives to this region and how we might come to understand it and do our highest work toward protecting it and the future. So my task is to pull a few threads from the conversation, since we've covered a great deal of ground, which I will do. And then after I've done that, Gary asked me to talk just a little bit about why, what do we get out of bringing together the artists and the scientists, the writers and the religious thinkers. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to take you to Mesopotamia. So I've got 8 or 9 minutes to cover a lot of ground. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to do that. So this anthology is truly a remarkable work. And I think it breaks apart any stereotypical thinking we might have about the desert. It really shows us what it is to have multifaceted perspectives on the desert. And this evening has been just a tiny sample of what that means. So the threads I'd like to pick up just because they are like the neon lights in my mind very quickly. I think that one of the big questions of the night, of course, is how do we come to know the desert, the arid Americas, and how do we place ourselves in our greatest service to these lands? And so Gary starts us off revealing how science helps to reveal the hidden realities of the desert. And his essay, which I encourage people to read, is a beautiful survey of the evolving research about how we come to understand the desert plants. And I think this notion of the hidden desert, the underground connections, the mutualisms that are very much a part of desert life, whether it's a nurse-tree relationship or a pollinator and plant relationship, these relationships of competition and cooperation take us to a new place that he writes about, and science brings us there, where we are not in a land of hostility, barbed spines, and poison. We are in a land of tremendous inventiveness, of problem solving in an ecosystem of extremity. So Gary brings us there with science. How do we come to deepen our understanding of the hidden desert? When Homero takes us through his poems and novels into imaginative engagement with the landscape, we see how profoundly complementary that vision is. The science is essential, but on the other hand, the experiential learning of being in the desert, where things are strange, it's sometimes hard to see what you're seeing. It's hard to perceive the reality. We see the landscape as a place of beauty, a place of peril, and a place of mystery. It's surreal and nothing is what it seems to be, and it forces one to pay very keen attention through the artistic eye as opposed to the scientific eye. Ezekiel, bringing us a historical vision through that wonderful travel back to Cabeza de Vaca, which is a great book, everyone should read it. how the desert is revealed through these historical documents, and how this landscape of heartache, the oppression of the indigenous people, is such a long, deep, and lasting story, and how this vision of los hombres humanos has been with us for a long time, and how we need to carry that vessel that comes to us out of history forward. So I think probably we land on the border as this zone of a criminalized border, a defiled border in terms of the indigenous people of the borderlands, a weaponized border. And it's right that Ezekiel and others speak of the moral imperative that we must build relationship in the border zone, and that one of the ways that we can do it is by these disciplines, which by their nature transcend borders. Art, science, and religion have the capacity to transcend and to build bridges across our differences. They are the antidotes to the toxicity of the politics of our time. And so these voices are utterly essential, the coming together of disciplines, not one above the other or not one under the other, but all in a chorus, trying to speak together to deeper understanding and compassion. Gary asked me to talk a little bit about what he's beginning to call a movement, and the book talks about this a little bit, a movement bringing these kinds of voices together. And of course, El Grupo de la Cien has been one of the best examples that we've had. But why bring together artists, scientists, religious thinkers, and activists? I've been trying to answer that question for the past 30 years. It's led me to write poems and essays, come up with new courses, take students out into the field so that they have the opportunity for experiential learning in this place, an immersion experience, so they can explore how the arts and the sciences can help us understand and adapt to climate change and work towards a more just and sustainable future. This work is grounded in the belief that art and science and religion are human enterprises that transcend borders. I'm not the only one, and we're not the only ones doing this. It is happening everywhere, as many of you know. The National Science Foundation for years has funded artists and writers to go on expeditions to Antarctica. The long-term ecological research sites of the National Science Foundation have increasingly been bringing artists, writers, composers into their research sites to see what their perceptions will add to what science is discovering in these places. Perhaps the best compendium that happens every 3 years when there's not a COVID virus amongst us, visual art in the art and environment field is the Nevada Museum of the Arts, which has a utterly brilliant international exhibition of works about art and environment curated by Bill Fox. It's one of the best experiments in how the visual arts can feed on the sciences and supplant the sciences. So I encourage you to check out the Nevada Museum of Art when we can change our locations once again. So why is all of this happening in so many places? Climate change and social injustice have profound emotional, psychological, and spiritual impacts on us. Facts are good, science is good. Without science, the future would indeed be hopeless. But science is not enough to bring the full array of human capabilities into our problem solving. We need the consolations, outrage, mystery, passion, beauty, griefs, hopes, and the quest for innovative thinking and new language that the arts bring to shake up patterns of thinking that are pathological and futureless. The ecotone between art and science is a rich zone of exchange and mutual inspiration. Science moves forward and new knowledges replace the old. The arts are different. The arts are timeless. The cave paintings at Lascaux or Altamira are not replaced by Picasso or Frida Kahlo or Toussaint's brilliant murals. These artworks all speak to us from the timelessness of the human imagination that gives depth and meaning to our lives. Captivating and just a little bit mysterious. These artworks do not challenge science, rather they complement it, and they remind us to keep asking whose voices are missing in how we understand the desert. I wanted to just mention a couple of other works because someone asked a question about diversity of voices. Just mention that this anthology is extraordinarily rich. 2 or 3 of the voices that I absolutely adore. Octaviana Trujillo, growing up in the village of Guadalupe outside of Phoenix, a Yaqui community, has an emotional connection with place, very much like Ezekiel's growing up in Argentina. She speaks of her love for the fragrances of their desert village. Sometimes I would go outside our home and with our dipper splash water on the adobe wall. I would take a whiff of it and on occasion, even taste its damp earthen soil. Francisco Cantu works from maps of migrants marking the places where they died on their journey through an Arizona landscape that has been weaponized by inhumane border policies. Even this grief can be transformed through art into compassion and imaginative play. So now on to Mesopotamia and the Epic of Gilgamesh. Why might a story, an epic poem, last for thousands of years? What will be our epic poems? What myths will mark our time? And I mean the word not in the sense of falsehood, it's only a myth, but in the sense of a story that does not die because it speaks to us of the mysterious and miraculous relationship between inner life and the world as we know it and as we wish it to be. So here's your bedtime story. There's a great moment in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which comes to us from the ancient Mesopotamian culture. Enkidu is the wild man, a hairy-bodied figure who embodies the natural world. His beauty is legend, the hair of his head like the grain fields of the goddess. He roams with herds, grazes with gazelles, drinks from rivers with the beasts, but he is also an eco-terrorist, breaking traps humans set for animals. So when the gods seek a companion for Gilgamesh, the warrior king of Uruk, they set their sights on Enkidu, thinking only the wild man has strength to match that of the king. Create his double and let the two contend. Let stormy heart contend with stormy heart, that peace may come to Uruk again. The gods employ a woman to seduce Enkidu away from his communion with the animals, but the animals recognize his betrayal, and those with whom he used to visit the watering places now flee from him. It is this image of a man who visits the watering places with the animals, whose hearts delight as his delights in water that stays with me. It's a vision of a biotic community in which the human world has not yet differentiated itself from nature. And that moment of loss when one sees the price Enkidu must pay for becoming sidekick to the king, the price the civilized world pays for its separation from nature, is a gut punch. It marks a major turning point in history. The animals no longer welcome us as members of their community. The wild man has betrayed his origin as kin among the peaceable beasts. A wild man no longer. Enkidu becomes entangled in the endless violence of human society and the shared grief of mortality. We too stand at a turning point in history. Our time characterized by the diminishment of the animals, the spillover of pathogens from animals to humans, anthropogenic changes to the atmosphere and oceans that threaten sustainability, the erosion of human community under geopolitical and climate forces. The dream of peace that led the gods to align Enkidu with Gilgamesh was just that, a dream in their time and ours, but a dream that still sustains us and gives us hope. And science will be there as our trusted companion in finding the language to write a new story that can sustain us for thousands of years. And we, all of us here together, must be the authors of that new story.
Thank you, Allison. That was a masterful tying it all together. I love the ecotone between the art and the sciences. Everybody, thank you so much. Actually, Alice, I'm going to invite you to come back on. Can everybody on the Zoom screen, if you would just turn on your cameras, and it would be great to see us all together. Everybody, thank you so much. Please take care of yourselves, take care of each other. We've put links into the text chat box about getting this. Gary, thank you for bringing us together and for this wonderful piece. It's been such an honor, such a privilege. This is a special evening. Appreciate all of you. Good night, everybody. Happy holidays.